So I guess we're into the second civil war. I guess the second fitna is the appropriate verbiage or wording. So yeah, we're gonna be looking at just again, if the Umayyads pull this off, I'm gonna be amazed because they are at the disadvantage, but they did win the battle last time. So I guess we're just gonna see if they pull through. And yeah, let's get to it. Let's watch the second civil war of the Muslims.
In many cases throughout the empire, local notables had nominally sworn loyalty to Ibn al-Zubayr while remaining functionally neutral, using the breakdown of authority to avoid Umayyad taxation. In others, Zubayrid authority was reliant on unsteady alliances with Kharijites and Shiites, and though these groups might have made common cause with Ibn al-Zubayr at first in order to topple the Umayyads, an alliance with the Kharijites would never be a lasting one unless he adopted their beliefs, alienating his other supporters in the process, and the Shia refused to name him caliph, seeking for a descendant of the murdered Caliph Ali to take his place on the throne. Thus, while Marwan controlled a secure Syrian power base and the caliphate's treasury, Ibn al-Zubayr struggled to create a united front amongst his supporters, leaving the Umayyads stronger and the Zubayrids weaker than their lopsided territorial control would suggest.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. And that just might be the key to the Umayyads winning, because we've seen this before. I think of like the Russian Civil War, you know, like where the whites on paper had the most territory, right? But there was a lot of internal, you know, disunity, and so the Red Army was able to overcome due to being more unified. So I'm thinking it might just go like that, and the Umayyads might, due to their more unified front, be able to like pull off a victory and win back the caliphate.
Indeed, shortly after the Umayyad victory in the Battle of Majrahit, Marwan was able to take Egypt largely unopposed, with his clansman Amr ibn Sa'id entering Fustat and rallying its population back to the Umayyad cause, while Marwan stood in standoff with Egypt's Zubayrid governor Abd al-Rahman ibn Jadam outside the city, a major step towards reunifying the caliphate and a sign of Ibn al-Zubayr's hollow authority. Meanwhile, other outbreaks of civil strife were occurring across the caliphate, most prominently in the Khorasan region, with Abd Allah ibn Kazim having never been appointed to governor by any caliph, instead forcing out Umayyad governor Salm ibn Ziyad.
After Yazid's death, Salim was unable to control his mutinous army, and he later fled to Basra. He chose his comrade Abdullah to govern the province. Both governors later gave their oaths of allegiance to Ibn Sa'd.
Thanks to anti-Umayyad sentiments among the army, the power vacuum allowed numerous local communities and factions within the army to drive out officials and seize control across Khorasan. However, Ibn Kazim's effectiveness and brutality in suppressing both rebels and opportunistic Hephthalite raiders, reportedly ordering his forces to execute prisoners until the sun set after one victory, quickly ended any opposition, allowing him to rule with little regard for either faction during the following years of civil war. And in Kufa, a militant Shiite movement known as the Al-Tawabin, or Penitents, was gathering steam. While the death of al-Hussein had caused shock and outrage across the entire Muslim community, the impact had been greatest among the Shia community of Kufa, whose support Hussein had been traveling to enlist, with many seeking either vengeance or martyrdom to compensate for failing to aid him. With the outbreak of the second fitna, propagandists were sent to garrison towns across Kufa, calling for vengeance and the turnover of power to the family of the Prophet. The movement began to split, however, with the arrival of Muqta al-Thaqafi on May 7, 684. Muqta claimed to be a follower of Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah, a son of Caliph Ali through a different wife than the Prophet's daughter Fatima. Al-Muqta's claimed that Ibn al-Hanafiyyah was the promised Mahdi, or the
Okay, the Muslims believe that Mahdi would appear near the end of time, shortly before the descent of the Prophet Isa, to protect humankind from chaos and corruption. by default. Oh my goodness.
Decided one, and the prospect of serving an heir to Ali served to sway a portion of the penitents away from their leader, Suleiman ibn Surad, and create a bitter divide. When the Zubayrid governor, Abdallah ibn Yazid, arrived on May 15th, it was all he could do to prevent violence breaking out between the two factions or against their erstwhile Zubayrid allies. Further weakening Ibn al-Zubayr, his Kharijite allies in Mecca deserted him during this same period. Tiring of al-Zubayr's vague claims of ideological support, they relocated to Basra and the Al-Yamama region to
He lost control so fast. Look at all these factions just spawning off, taking chunks of the caliphate. Like, this is insane. But this is interesting. I live for stuff like this. There's just something so cool about watching like an empire fracture and everyone just go for it. It's basically like Game of Thrones. Everyone's going for the throne. Who's gonna unify it all? Like, this is the stuff that like I love watching. Like, I'm putting my money so far on the Umayyads just because they seem to have their crap together. But who knows, man? Who knows?
Raise a rebellion of their own under the leadership of Abu Talut. They would remain a major thorn in the side of the Zubayrids, even conquering much of the Arabian Peninsula in the coming years. Of all these groups, the first to engage in a major campaign would be Suleiman ibn Surad's penitents, who began their long-awaited invasion of Syria on November 15, 684. However, despite the lingering grief over Hussein's death and years of propaganda work, Suleiman was greatly disappointed by the turnout when his call to arms finally came, with only 5,000 out of 16,000 whose support had been promised materializing, and many of these deserting in the coming months. Nonetheless, despite Abdallah ibn Yazid's attempts to convince them to remain in Kufa in unity with the Zubayrids, he wasted no time in departing, leaving Kufa on the 17th, first to Hussein's tomb at Karbala for a day and night of mourning, and then on to Al-Qarqasiyah. Here they were provided supplies and information by the sympathetic Qaysid chieftain Zufar ibn al-Harith, one of the Zubayrid commanders during the disaster at Majrahid. The Umayyad army, returning from the subjugation of Egypt, had recently left Raqqa and was marching towards the town of Ain al-Wada on their way to invade Iraq. Informed of their whereabouts by Zufar, and enjoying superior mobility with his mounted army, Suleiman made haste to reach the site before his foes, arriving 5 days before the Umayyad.
Suleiman, I think is I don't want to say an idiot, because like for all I know he might just end up being like, that comment might end up aging horribly, but I really don't think his position is good. He only has like 5,000 dudes, and he's like, you know, and I understand he doesn't want to join up with the Zubayrids, but which I think would probably be better for his situation. I mean, obviously I know that they don't want to, like the belief differences just won't allow them to, but like, him just going off on his own with his small army and now challenging the Umayyads, I think is insane. It seems like he's trying to start beef with them, and I think he's gonna get himself and his cause killed right now.
And camping to the west of the city in order to cut them off from food and water. Having reinforced in Egypt and numbering close to 20,000, the Umayyad army held an advantage in numbers, but was divided against itself. While Ubaydallah ibn Ziyad was in overall command of the army, he was not present during its march through what was thought to be friendly territory, leaving two of his commanders, Al-Hussein ibn Numair and Ibn Di al-Kala, to squabble over leadership, traveling and camping separately as they marched unknowingly towards the penitents' ambush. When they arrived at the beginning of January 685, it was Ibn Di al-Kala's smaller contingent that first saw battle, with the penitents being led to his camp by a local Bedouin and launching a surprise attack. Though outnumbered, surprise and confusion allowed Suleiman's charging horsemen to put al-Kala's forces to rout, with many being run down and slain and their camp abandoned to be looted. This initial engagement would do little to even the odds, however, and Ibn Numayr was sent with a larger force of 12,000 on January 4th.
Okay, I have to give Suleiman that though, like, he definitely is using that speed advantage, and he definitely got the drop on them. But the Umayyads managed to get their act together and, like, have a more unified front. Then, yeah, I don't know how he could overcome them, like, the odds, man. Like, unless Suleiman just goes full on, like, guerrilla warfare, ambushes, attacks, like, Night Raid, I don't know. Like, I think, like, I don't know how he would do in, like, a straight-up pitch battle. I think that would be bad, but I don't know, man. I don't know, I don't want to hold off saying, but it just, the odds don't look good, but that's not a bad start. That's actually a pretty strong start off the bat, though. Like I said, I think if he maybe keeps utilizing surprise and whatnot, he might go even further. I guess we'll see, I don't know.
During a brief standoff before the battle, the demands of each side were conveyed, with the penitents demanding Ibn Ziyad be turned over to them for his role in Hussein's death, and the Umayyads demanding Suleiman swear fealty to Marwan. But these demands were little more than formality, the two armies coming together in battle after their refusal. The penitents put their mobility to good use, following advice from Zufar, reinforcing or withdrawing contingents as they came under attack, rather than confront the larger Umayyad force head-on. Both
Okay, that's smart. I like, they're not gonna try to strong-arm it. Like, they may not have the full advantage, but in terms of numerical, but, like, I think if they keep utilizing their mobility, they might go, like I said, they could go really far, though. But, like, that's if they keep doing that, you know what I mean?
Commanders led their respective centers, with elements of Suleiman's horsemen dismounting to support their comrades from the ground where the fighting was thickest. This skirmishing was won by the penitents in the short term, though not without losses, and Ibn Numayr's forces withdrew in good order to regroup with those of Ibn Dialkala. Now reunited, with Ibn Ziyad chastising Al-Kala for his earlier defeat and stripping him of command to end the feud, the Umayyad army now stood poised to bring their full numbers to bear, leading to a day of bloody fighting on the 5th that took a heavy toll on the already outnumbered Shia.
Okay, that doesn't bode well now that the command structure has been dealt with on the Umayyad side. Like I said, a more unified Umayyad thing front is dangerous, I think. But, like, again, Suleiman seems to just... He's giving them a pitch battle, but... I don't want to write him off. Like I said, this is the thing, I don't know how far he gets. Or maybe he might pull off an upset and win, which would be insane, by the way. But... Like I said, right now my money's on the Umayyads unifying the Caliphate once again. But again, like, I'm not the best at predicting, guys. I'm just trying to have fun with it. So I'm still putting my money on the Umayyads, though Suleiman might just make a great upset if he pulls off a victory in this pitch battle.
Fighting resumed on the 6th. The exhausted penitents soon found themselves pressed from all sides, unable
Ooh, but look, reinforcements are coming.
to prevent the Umayyads from flanking and surrounding their separated cavalry contingents. The same tactics that had previously enabled them to avoid the full weight of Umayyad numbers, now allowing them to be defeated piecemeal. Suleiman ibn Sarad and several of his close companions were slain by punishing volleys of arrows, with a series of spirited charges by Suleiman's second-in-command, Al-Musayyab ibn Najaba, and the late arrival of reinforcements from Basra doing nothing to turn the tide. The destruction of...
Okay, so I was right. Suleiman did go a little further than I expected him, though, but yeah, getting himself killed is kind of what I said earlier. I'm happy that at least aged well.
the penitent cause brought the Umayyads one step closer to recovering their caliphate, though Marwan would not long outlive it, dying in the spring of 685, either by plague or assassination carried out by his queen, depending on which accounts you believe.
Whoa, that's crazy. Some of the last Umayyads were just they keep dying like flies. Like the last three in like Marwan now, like the Umayyad dynasty caliphate seems to be losing their leaders really quickly though. Like that's kind of what I've noticed. They just keep falling like flies so far.
He was succeeded by his son Abd al-Malik. Ain al-Wada did not mark the end of Shia participation in the second fitna, however. With their leaders dead, survivors from Suleiman's movement turned to Muqta al-Thaqafi, who had been growing in power in Iraq by appealing to traditionally disadvantaged non-Arab converts. Though he continued to characterize himself as a mere follower of Ibn al-Hanafiyyah, their actual ties remained tenuous, with Muqta even using a falsified letter of support from his figurehead to sway local leader Ibrahim ibn al-Ashtar to back his coup, according to some accounts, and acting to isolate Ibn al-Hanafiyyah from the movement championing him. But whatever Muqta's motivations, October saw him break any remaining ties with Ibn al-Zubayr and oust his governor, Abdallah ibn Muti, taking control of most of Iraq and Armenia. Further Kharijite uprisings toppled Zubayrid authority in southern Persia and Bahrain, leaving...
Dude, everything is just falling apart. The entire caliphate is like in a full-on free-for-all. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4 different factions all fighting each other. Man. Again, I'm putting my money on the Umayyads, but like, I don't know how this could go, man. Like, this is my prediction. I normally I'm like really like iffy about making predictions, but I'm putting my money on the Umayyads. I'm gonna stick with that, but we'll see if this ages horribly or not in the coming videos. But yeah,
both sides of the Persian Gulf in Kharijite hands, and Ibn al-Zubayr's would-be caliphate smaller than ever. But as weakened as he may have been, he was still far from helpless, defeating both an Umayyad push on Medina under the Qudar tribal leader, Hubaysh ibn Dulja, and a Kharijite attack on Basra to secure his remaining holdings, leaving the final victor of the civil war still in doubt.
At least he's putting up a fight. Like, for a second there, it seems like everything was just spiraling out of his hands.
The next few years would see some of the Umayyads' momentum reversed. The invasion force that had routed Suleiman's penitents made slow progress after this victory, delayed by Marwan's death and uprisings from the Qaysi tribes that had supported Dahak at Marj Rahit. When they finally launched their invasion of Iraq a year and a half later, in the summer of 686, al-Muqta was at something of a disadvantage, as his attempts to appease both the Arab tribal nobility and non-Arab converts, or Mawali, had fallen through and led to attempts by the tribal nobility to depose him over perceived erosion of their privileges. This conflict was further stoked by Ibn al-Zubayr's brother and governor of Basra, Musab, who courted the disgruntled Kufan nobility in an attempt to regain Iraq. The death of one of Muqta's commanders to plague shortly after his victory over an Umayyad probing force near Mosul sparked rumors that his army had been defeated, with an opportunistic revolt breaking out in late June. Nevertheless, the besieged Muqta was able to both put down this coup attempt, holding out in his palace long enough for Ibrahim ibn al-Ashtar's army to return from the Umayyad front and relieve him, and mobilize a large army of predominantly Persian-speaking Mawali and Shia partisans to confront the Umayyads, meeting them at the beginning of August, some 15 miles east of Mosul on the banks of the Qazir River. While Ziyad's army had been estimated to number as high as 80,000, this figure is far out of proportion with the same army's numbers during the Battle of Ain al-Wada or similar armies raised out of Syria, and is likely reflective of historian
Okay, Abu narration in al-Tabari was largely criticized by other Islamic scholars. Many others which claimed that his narration was too weak, inconsistent, and strongly sided with the Shiites.
Abu Miknaf's anti-Umayyad leanings. Though no fully reliable figure exists, the true number was likely little higher than 30,000, even allowing for reinforcement from the remains of the failed push on Medina. Even so, the Umayyads held a definite numerical advantage over the 13,000 under Ibrahim ibn al-Ashtar, but were as weakened by division as before. The commander of their left wing, Umayr ibn al-Hubab, held a meeting with Ibrahim the night of August 5th to offer his defection in the coming battle. Following Umayyad's advice, Ibn al-Ashtar wasted no time in bringing the battle to the Umayyads the following morning, ignoring the normal protocol of raiding and skirmishing as his smaller army came crashing into their larger yet still disorganized foe. The initial stages of the battle went in the Umayyads' favor.
Holy crap. I wonder if the Umayyads are about to lose right now. Cause man, the Umayyads, I'm starting to see that the cracks of their problem seems to be disunity, at least in their military front. They started off with the huge advantage of being a more solidified group, and that allowed them to take Syria and Egypt. But now that, like, he keeps explaining that their military hierarchy, like, they don't have, like, one overall, well, they do, but, like, it's not like before. They're just, like, disunity and, like, division between I guess the commanders and leaders, and that seems to be their biggest, like, problem right now. And I wonder if Umayyad is about to do a heel turn right in the middle of this battle, because if he, like, jumps his own side in the back, like, I don't know how the Umayyads would, like, recover from that.
With the Umayyad right wing under Ibn Numayr slaying the commander of Ibn al-Ashtar's right and putting them to flight. However, the fallen banner was quickly taken up by Abdullah ibn Waqa, nephew to one of the Prophet's companions, who rallied enough of the fleeing soldiers back to his side to stall the Umayyad advance. On the Umayyad left, accounts conflict on Umayyah's role, with the historian al-Kalbi claiming the promised defection never materialized, and Umayyah remained loyal to Ibn Ziyad, while others hold he deserted the battlefield. As he and Ibn al-Ashtar converse peacefully after the battle, the latter is likely closer to the truth. But either way, he took a rather passive role, his inaction leaving the Umayyad center open for the Kufan right and center to launch a desperate flanking attack. Crucial in this effort was Sharik ibn Jadir al-Taglibi, a warrior who had fought under Caliph Ali in the first fitna, whose furious cavalry charge carved open a path to Ubayd Allah ibn Ziyad and toppled the Umayyad banners.
Holy crap, of course the flank, the oldest trick in the book, pulled off the victory. But yeah, Umayyad, even if he didn't directly turn on his side, like, his passiveness allowed that. So holy crap, dude, who's gonna win this? Like, holy crap. I didn't expect the freaking Umayyads to lose. This is a pretty big loss, though.
With the death of Ibn Ziyad and the continuing dissension and rivalry within the Umayyad ranks, the great army quickly dissolved, Umayyah's forces departing peacefully, while many others drowned trying to flee across the Qazir River. The short but brutal battle would delay any further Umayyad move against Iraq for several years, but do little to secure Mukhtar's unstable position, with the Zubayrids and his own tribal nobility still conspiring against him. Some months later, most likely in the late autumn of 686, Musab ibn al-Zubayr would march out of Basra for his own invasion, bolstered by exiled Kufan noble rebels. Given little time to recover, Ibn al-Ashtar's army made haste to meet them, though without the leader that had carried them to victory against the Umayyads. Ibn al-Ashtar himself, now the Zubayrid-friendly governor of Mosul, abandoned Mukhtar's cause under unclear circumstances in Qazir's aftermath.
So much is happening. I'm sorry, but like, so much is happening between deaths, defection, like, this is all over the place. This is like what you would call a cluster F. And, oh man. Mukhtar? That's what I'm gonna call it. Mukhtar's entire cause seems like it's precarious at best, and that he's had to be carried by, like, you know, obviously very competent people who are now deserting him. So like, and he's essentially fighting the Zubiat and the Umayyads. So he's kind of like sandwiched between the two and fighting.
Coinciding defection of Umayyah, suggesting a likely pact between the two. Amr ibn Shumayt took command. Though lacking his predecessor's experience, his army soon met with disaster just north of Basra at Madha, with resentment among the tribal nobility in both armies towards the Mawali, making up the bulk of Mukhtar's forces, coming to the fore in gruesome fashion. While non-Arabs were traditionally barred from serving as mounted warriors, Mukhtar had relaxed this rule and increased their pay to earn their support. Yet at the Battle of Madha, Ibn Shumayt once more required them to dismount and fight as foot soldiers. When Ibn Shumayt was slain and his army routed, the Kufan horsemen escaped, while huge numbers of the Mawali infantry were run down and slaughtered by the vengeful exiles, suffering a massively disproportionate death toll, with few escaping and no prisoners taken. This disaster shook faith in Mukhtar's messianic movement, and total collapse was not long in coming. The Zubayrid invasion force made haste by boat and horse towards Kufa, hastily assembling another army and attempting in vain to delay the invaders by flooding the canals along the Euphrates. Mukhtar would personally lead his army in the second desperate clash against the Zubayrids at Harura on Kufa's outskirts. Mukhtar and his forces fought bravely, with the battle initially in the balance. Muhammad ibn al-Ash'ath, leader of the Kufan exiles fighting under Musab, was slain, and the Highland Hijazi tribesmen, making up a fifth of the Basran force, fled early in the battle. However, these initial successes would be brought to naught when the Basran left wing, which, under the cautious Al-Malab Abi Sufra, had initially held back from the fighting, swung forward, crushing and routing Kufan forces already bloodied and exhausted from almost a day's fighting. Though Mukhtar narrowly escaped, his army and hopes were destroyed, and his supporters executed en masse by the victors, with the 4-month palace siege in Kufa only dragging out the inevitable. On April 3, 687, Musab's forces stormed his palace and executed him, swiftly restoring Armenia and Iraq to the Zubayrid fold.
Okay, so the Zubayrids have pulled off what the Umayyads couldn't, so that gets rid of one entire faction.
Other than Kharajite.
Okay, so the Zubayrids so far, like, they were losing control, but they've managed to fight back, pushing back the Umayyads and out defeating Mukhtar's entire faction. So the Zubayrids are fighting. Like, I'm actually, like, I find that interesting. They basically lost control off the bat, but they seem to be rebounding, quickly, you know? So that's kind of been the most interesting aspect. I think it might just end up being a showdown between the Zubayrids and the Umayyads. That seems like where it might end up going. There's still the blue faction here. I don't know how they're gonna deal with that, but like, I don't know, man. I don't know how this is gonna turn out.
Raiding and small border confrontations, the resulting Umayyad-Zubayrid stalemate would persist for the next 4 years, with both sides exhausted by the long civil war, and no major battles between the two occurred until 691. During this time, the long-neglected frontiers saw action once more, with an Umayyad army under Zubayr ibn Qais dispatched to the mountains of Algeria, where the Byzantine-allied Berber king, Caecilius, had taken advantage of the civil war to overrun much of Ifriqiya. Defeating and killing him in 688, Zuhair retook Kairouan and re-established the Caliphate as the dominant force in the region, with only the Byzantine stronghold of Carthage remaining a threat. And Abd al-Malik remained active against his Zubayrid rivals during the apparent lull as well, engaging in intrigue and diplomacy with Zubayrid supporters across the Caliphate, taking advantage of Ibn al-Zubayr's weakness and the growing apathy towards his predecessor's misdeeds after nearly a decade of war to chip away at his foe's support base. Though his next attempt to invade Iraq in 689 was interrupted by his kinsman Amr ibn Said's short-lived coup attempt. The end of the civil war would almost come as an anticlimax after the fierce battles of its first years, with the majority of Musab's army defecting and abandoning him to die.
Holy crap, I'm gonna be right for once. I said I think the Umayyads are gonna win. Dude, if I'm right for once, I'd be so happy, because I feel like I'm always wrong. But Malik seems to be, like, more cunning. He seems to be taking more of a... He seems to take the initiative. Between the diplomacy and the constant continuing of the aggression, he seems to be the caliph who is taking the initiative, if you would. Which I think is a huge part in something like this, right?
When Abd al-Malik finally recaptured Iraq in October 691. Abd al-Malik had Musab and his son Isa buried with honor, lamenting the tragedy of the civil war. But despite his poetic words, he remained ruthless in rooting out any remaining opposition, besieging Mecca, and mopping up Abdullah ibn Zubayr's last supporters the following year. Though putting down the Kharijite rebels and independents such as Ibn Qasim would take several more...
Okay, so I guess I was right. The Umayyads have just retook everything. Malik, man, ruthless but effective, and he took the initiative, and that's what you need in order to win, right? That was amazing.
More years, the Umayyad Caliphate had emerged victorious against its first would-be usurper. The second fitna had been a long and bloody affair, marked with a further departure from the unity of the Rashidun era. Even during the first fitna, the prospect of Muslims fighting Muslims remained a painful aberration, with concerted efforts at mediation preceding battles, and the conflict being brought into religious arbitration. But during the second fitna, the sectarian schisms arising out of the first, and the blood feuds that accompanied them, made violence and retribution all too easy to accept. But shaken though it might have been, the Caliphate remained whole, with further victories still lying ahead in Africa, Asia, and even the unsuspecting Visigothic kingdom of Iberia.
So I'm gonna end the video right here. Overall, that was amazing. Like I said, that I love kind of watching empires just turn into free-for-alls, because I just find that, like, interesting, like, and yeah, like, the Umayyads so far have just been finding ways to keep pulling through, and yeah, I just think they're really amazing, and despite their flounderings a bit earlier, they really pulled it together, and I'm happy that I got it right. I was like, I'm gonna put my money on the Umayyads. We'll see how this goes. So I'm happy about that, and I guess we're gonna continue tomorrow back to the expansion part of this series, right? I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye, everyone.